One of the most unusual and curious conflicts in history was the unexpected and theatrical French invasion of Mexico. To understand this peculiar timeline, we must first take a look at the circumstances that led up to it. In the late 1850s, Mexico was mired in a civil war. Benito Juarez, a liberal reformist, and his supporters were at odds with Felix Zuluaga's conservatives, with the neighboring United States throwing their support behind the former. During this time, Mexico was deeply indebted to multiple foreign powers, and as Juarez rose to authority, he put a pause on all payments for 2 years as there wasn't much of an alternative for Mexico. This decision was deeply dissatisfying for the Europeans who were owed money by the Mexicans. So, on October 31, 1861, the governments of Great Britain, France, and Spain met in London to discuss possible reactions to the new Mexican government's decision. The ultimate conclusion was that a tripartite agreement would be necessary, as with joint intervention into Mexico to retrieve the money that the three nations were owed. This agreement was eagerly signed by all, but at this time, no one realized that France had an ulterior motive. France was currently under the command of Napoleon III, a man motivated by more than just money. Napoleon wanted to expand the influence of his empire, and this was the perfect excuse to see if Mexico could become part of that influence. This was not known to either Spain or Britain, at least not yet. Throughout December of 1861, the Europeans all made landfall at the port of Veracruz, but from there, chaos began to erupt. At first, the intention was for the three European powers to work together to take Veracruz and force the Mexican government into talks so a real solution could be found for the debt disaster. While the tripartite nations stated that they had no intentions of conquering Mexico or anything of the like, Juarez was strongly resistant to their presence. Ironically, his conservative opponents were somewhat welcoming to the Europeans, seeing this as a possible advantage in their fight against the reformists. By the start of 1862, it was becoming clear to the Europeans that one amongst their ranks may not be on the same page. By January, France had begun to float the idea of establishing a monarchy in Mexico, but this was shot down by Britain and Spain. It was not yet clear to the latter two how serious the French really were. In February, the Europeans reiterated that they recognized the current Mexican government as it was and were only there to discuss the issue of unpaid debt. The Convention of La Soledad was then signed and ratified by the Mexican government. Negotiations shortly began but fell apart by spring, as the French were then clear about their aims and would not compromise. Realizing that they had been duped, Britain and Spain arranged their own agreements with Mexico and withdrew their troops. Contrarily, France put the pedal to the metal. The French had already taken multiple cities such as Córdoba, Orizaba, and Tehuacan, and a declaration of war was issued.